Hi. In Part 6, Section B, we're going to be looking at the Enlightenment and politics. The 18th century, known in the West as the Age of the Enlightenment, from one perspective was an age of optimism. It had trust in science and in the power of human reason, belief in natural order, and an overriding faith in the theory of progress, that the world was better than what it had been and was bound to get better. The philosophes, a French term for the intellectual that professed this creed, developed and articulated the fundamental ideas of natural law, meaning the belief in political freedom, free enterprise, and a society based on a social contract between rulers and ruled. These ideas fanned the flames of revolt, culminating in violent revolutions in America and France. In the field of politics, Thomas Hobbes is one of the first modern proponents of materialism, and, like many of his materialistic successors, was interested in solving political rather than philosophical problems. Hobbes' political philosophy finds its fullest statement in his book Leviathan, first published in 1651. The theory of society that he describes there totally denies the existence in the universe of any divinely established morality. According to Hobbes, all laws are created by humans to protect themselves from one another, a necessary precaution in view of human greed and violence. Organized society, in consequence, is arrived when individuals give up their personal liberty to a Leviathan, an omnipotent government that will guarantee peace and prosperity. Individuals do this, so he states, to achieve security through a social contract. As Hobbes stated, human beings, far from being capable of the highest achievements, are dangerous and aggressive, creatures who need to be saved from themselves. John Locke, English philosopher and scientist, disagreed with Hobbes. In his 1690 essay concerning human understanding, Locke repudiated Hobbes, arguing that people are perfectly capable of governing for themselves. The human mind at birth, he claimed, is a tabula rasa, a blank slate. And our government, what we learn and how we learn it, fills this slate. The theory will become the hallmark of empiricism. In simple terms, John Locke combated the idea, among many other rationalists prior to him, that the will to submit to absolute authority was present in the human mind at birth. His concept of tabula rasa, embraced by many thinkers of the Enlightenment, denied this. In his second treatise of government, always in 1690, Locke went further. He refuted the divine rights of kings and argues that humans are by nature free, equal, and independent, and that they submit to government only because they find it convenient to do so. The social contract that they create, claims Locke, does not require to surrender the sovereignty to the ruler. The ruler is a limited authority that must be held in check by the governmental system, balanced by a separation of powers. Finally, humans expect their rulers to protect their rights, and if the ruler fails, they have the right to revolt in order to reclaim their natural freedom. For John Locke, revolution against tyrannical rule is not only a right, but it is an obligation. This form of liberalism, literally from the Latin liberare, means to free, sets the stage for the revolutions that will dominate the world in the 18th and 19th century. This work would deeply influence many thinkers in the 18th century, not least of all Thomas Jefferson, who drew heavily upon the work in drafting the American Declaration of Independence. And finally, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, on equality. He was a major contributor to the encyclopedia. He was an educator, a composer, playwright, a political scientist. Yes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, quite a universal mind. Although a man of the Enlightenment, he was also one of its biggest critiques. He was born in Geneva, Switzerland. He then moved at a young age to Paris, and there he began his career. After abandoning the group of philosophers that produced the encyclopedia, he spent much of an unhappy and restless life, writing philosophical treatises and novels that express his political convictions. In his discourse on the origin of the inequality among men, one that I chose, briefly stated, Rousseau believed that the natural goodness of the human race had been corrupted by the growth of civilization, and that the freedom of the individual had been destroyed by the growth of society. For Rousseau, humans were good and society was bad. Rousseau's praise of the simple virtues like unselfishness and kindness, and his regard for natural human feelings, have identified his philosophy with a belief in the noble savage. But this phrase is misleading. Far from advocating a return to primitive existence in some non-existent Garden of Eden, Rousseau passionately strove to create a new social order. Although Rousseau's writings express a complex political philosophy, most of his readers were more interested in spontaneous feeling than in his political theories. His contempt for the superficial and the artificial, and his praise for the simple and direct relationships between individuals, did a great deal to help demolish the principles of aristocracy and continue to inspire believers in human equality. Given such thinking, however, that is, his rejections of manufacturing and invention, celebrated by the philosophists, it is hardly surprising that Rousseau ultimately withdrew from society altogether, suffering increasingly acute attacks of paranoia, and he died insane. A passage from Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Discourse on the Origin of Inequality Among Men is quite paramount to look into. Here Jean-Jacques Rousseau shows his dispassionate ideology. So long as men remained content with their rustic huts, so long as they were satisfied with clothes made out of skins of animals and sewn together with thorns and fish bones, adorned themselves only with feathers and shells, and continued to paint their bodies different colors, to improve and beautify their bows and arrows, and to make, in a word, so long as they undertook only what a single person could accomplish and confined themselves to such arts as did not require the joint labor of several hands, they lived free. But from the moment one man began to stand in need of the help of another, from the moment it appeared advantageous to any one man to have enough provisions for two, equality disappeared. Property was introduced, work became indispensable, and vast forests became smiling fields, which man had to water with the sweat of his brow, and where slavery and misery were soon seen to germinate and grow up with the crops.